What if I told you that in just 3 seconds, you could discover who you truly are when death stares you in the face? Not the person you pretend to be on social media, not the version of yourself you present at work, but the raw, unfiltered truth of your character when everything is stripped away. Marcus Porcius Cato, one of Rome's most legendary senators, developed what I call the 3-second death test, a psychological assessment so powerful that it reveals more about your true nature than years of modern therapy ever could. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how this ancient technique works, why modern neuroscience proves its accuracy, and most importantly, how to use it to transform yourself into someone you actually respect. But first, let me tell you about the night that changed everything for a man who would become one of history's greatest examples of unshakable character. It was the year 46 before Christ. The Roman Republic was dying. Julius Caesar's armies had crushed all opposition, and the ancient system of government that had ruled the Mediterranean for centuries was crumbling into dictatorship. In the North African city of Utica, Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger faced an impossible choice. Caesar had won the civil war, Pompey was dead, the Republic was finished, and Cato, the last true defender of Roman virtue, had 3 options. He could surrender and live as Caesar's prisoner, a broken symbol of a dead ideal. He could flee to some distant land and spend his remaining years in exile, forgotten and powerless. Or he could choose a third path, one that would echo through history for over 2,000 years. But here's what's fascinating about Cato's story. It wasn't just about politics or military defeat. It was about something far more profound, something that reveals a truth about human nature that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You see, Cato understood something that modern psychology has only recently begun to grasp, that your true character isn't revealed in moments of comfort and safety. It's revealed in the 3 seconds between facing an impossible situation and deciding how to respond. Those 3 seconds are what I call the death test, not because death is always literally involved, although sometimes it is, but because in those moments, everything you think you know about yourself dies. Your excuses die, your self-deceptions die, your carefully constructed image dies, and what's left is the truth. The question is, what will that truth reveal about you? Cato developed a framework for understanding this moment, and it's more relevant today than ever before. Because while you might never face Caesar's armies, you will face moments that test your character just as severely. The phone call that changes everything, the betrayal that shatters your world, the failure that destroys your plans, the diagnosis that rewrites your future. In those moments, who are you really? Cato believed that this question was the most important thing any person could answer, but he also believed that most people were lying to themselves about the answer. They thought they knew who they were, but they had never truly been tested. They lived in what philosophers call the comfortable darkness of self-deception, until the moment when reality ripped that comfort away and demanded an accounting. But what makes Cato's approach so powerful isn't just that he identified this phenomenon, it's that he created a systematic way to prepare for it, a method for building the kind of character that would choose honor over comfort, truth over convenience, principle over survival, and this is where the 3-second test comes in. But before I reveal exactly how this test works and how you can use it to transform your life, you need to understand what happened to Cato in those final hours in Utica, because his response to the ultimate test became the template for how any person can face their darkest moment with unbreakable dignity. Cato spent his final evening in a way that would have seemed impossible to most people facing certain doom. He had dinner with friends. He discussed philosophy. He laughed. He even played games with his children. To anyone watching, he seemed completely at peace, as if nothing unusual was happening at all. But this wasn't denial or delusion. This was the result of a lifetime spent preparing for exactly this moment. You see, Cato had been practicing what Stoic philosophers called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Every day he had imagined losing everything he valued, his family, his position, his life, his ideals, not to become pessimistic or depressed, but to build what modern psychologists now call psychological resilience. He had repeatedly asked himself the fundamental question of the death test. If I lost everything tomorrow, who would I be? If all my external achievements were stripped away, what would remain? If I faced my greatest fear, how would I choose to respond? And through years of honest self-examination, he had built something that most people never develop, an identity that wasn't dependent on circumstances, a sense of self that couldn't be destroyed by external events, a core of character that remained steady no matter what chaos swirled around it. This is what made his final hours so remarkable. When his friends begged him to surrender to Caesar, Cato wasn't tempted because he had already decided who he was. When they offered him paths to survival, he wasn't swayed because his identity wasn't built on survival. When they reminded him of everything he would lose, he wasn't moved because he had already practiced losing it all. The 3-second test had become so much a part of him that when the ultimate moment arrived, there was no hesitation, no internal conflict, no desperate searching for the right answer. He simply acted in accordance with who he had chosen to become. But here's what most people misunderstand about Cato's story. They think it's about choosing death over life. They think it's about rigid inflexibility or dramatic gestures. They completely miss the point. The death test isn't about any specific choice you make in a crisis. It's about whether you make that choice from a place of character or from a place of fear. It's about whether you respond as the person you've chosen to become or as the person circumstances are trying to force you to be. And this distinction changes everything about how you approach not just major crises, but every single challenge you face in daily life. But to truly understand how this works, you need to see how Cato's framework applies to the modern world. And you need to understand what cutting-edge research in neuroscience and psychology tells us about why the 3-second test is so accurate at revealing our true nature. Here's what neuroscientists have discovered about the human brain under extreme stress. When you face a genuine crisis, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational planning and self-control, essentially shuts down. The amygdala, your brain's alarm system, takes over and floods your system with stress hormones. In those moments, you don't have access to your usual mental resources. You can't think your way through the situation. You can't analyze pros and cons. You can't carefully consider your options. You simply react from whatever foundation of character you've already built. This is why the 3-second test is so revealing. In those crucial moments between stimulus and response, you discover what's actually there when all the surface layers are stripped away. If you've spent years building genuine strength of character, it will emerge automatically. If you've spent years avoiding difficult truths about yourself, that avoidance will also emerge automatically. The crisis doesn't create your character, it reveals it. This is exactly what happened to Cato in Utica, and it's what happens to every person who faces their version of the 3-second test. But here's the fascinating part. Modern psychology has identified the exact same principles that Cato used to prepare for his test. They just use different language to describe them. What Cato called virtue ethics, psychologists now call values-based decision-making. What he called philosophical practice, they now call cognitive behavioral therapy. What he called character building, they now call identity formation. The ancient wisdom and modern science are pointing to the same fundamental truth. Your response to crisis is determined by the work you do long before the crisis arrives. This is why the 3-second test is so powerful as a tool for personal development. It forces you to confront the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are when it matters most. Most people live their entire lives in this gap without ever acknowledging it exists. They tell themselves they would be brave in a crisis, but they avoid small discomforts every day. They believe they would stand up for their principles under pressure, but they compromise those principles whenever it's convenient. They imagine they would face adversity with grace and dignity, but they fall apart when their internet connection is slow or their coffee order is wrong. The 3-second test cuts through all of this self-deception and forces you to deal with reality, but it also gives you a framework for closing that gap between your idealized self and your actual self. Here's how it works in practice. Every day, you face small versions of the 3-second test, moments when you must choose between comfort and character, between convenience and principle, between what you want to do and what you know you should do. These moments are your training ground. Each time you choose character over comfort, you're building the foundation that will hold when you face your ultimate test. Each time you choose convenience over principle, you're weakening that foundation. Cato understood this completely. He didn't suddenly become a person of unshakable character in his final moments. He became that person through decades of small choices made consistently, even when no one was watching. This is the true power of the death test. It's not just a way to assess your current character. It's a way to build the character you want to have when it matters most. Let me tell you about Sarah, a modern example of someone who applied Cato's principles without even knowing it. Sarah was a successful marketing executive at a Fortune 500 company. She had everything she thought she wanted: corner office, six-figure salary, company car, respect from her colleagues. Then came the 3-second moment that changed her life forever. During a routine audit, Sarah discovered that her company had been systematically overcharging their clients, particularly small nonprofits that trusted them to manage their limited budgets ethically. The fraud went all the way to the top. Her boss was involved, the chief executive officer knew, the board was complicit, and Sarah had 3 seconds to decide who she was going to be. She could stay quiet, keep her job, and pretend she never saw what she saw. She could transfer to another department and claim plausible deniability. Or she could blow the whistle, knowing it would almost certainly destroy her career in the industry. In those 3 seconds, Sarah discovered something about herself that surprised her. Despite years of climbing the corporate ladder and making compromises along the way, there was still a core of integrity that refused to bend. She couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent, so she documented everything, contacted the authorities, and testified in court. The company was fined millions of dollars, dozens of people were indicted, and Sarah was blacklisted from her industry. She lost her job, her savings, her professional network, and her planned future, but she gained something more valuable. She gained the knowledge that when it truly mattered, she had chosen character over comfort, that when her 3-second test arrived, she had passed it. Today, Sarah runs a small nonprofit that helps other whistleblowers navigate the legal and emotional challenges of speaking truth to power. She makes a fraction of what she used to earn, but she sleeps peacefully every night, knowing exactly who she is. This is the transformative power of the death test. It's not about the external circumstances of your life. It's about the internal foundation of your character. Sarah's story illustrates something crucial that Cato understood 20 centuries ago. The moments that define us aren't usually the moments we expect. They arrive without warning, in ordinary settings, disguised as routine decisions. But they have the power to reveal everything about who we really are beneath the surface. And more importantly, they have the power to transform us into the person we choose to become. But here's the key insight that most people miss. You don't have to wait for your 3-second test to arrive. You can start preparing for it right now by applying Cato's framework to your daily life. Here's how to implement the 3-second death test in your own life, starting today. First, identify your core values with brutal honesty. Not the values you wish you had, or the values that sound impressive to others, but the principles you would actually be willing to suffer for. Cato valued the Roman Republic more than his own life. What do you value more than your comfort, your convenience, or your safety? Write them down. Be specific. Be honest. If you can't think of anything you'd be willing to suffer for, that's valuable information about your current character. It's not a moral judgment. It's simply data you can use to build a stronger foundation. Second, practice small acts of integrity every single day. Tell the truth when lying would be easier. Keep promises when breaking them would be more convenient. Stand up for what's right when staying silent would be more comfortable. These aren't just nice things to do. They're training exercises for your character. Every time you choose principle over convenience in a small situation, you're building the strength you'll need when you face a large one. Third, regularly practice the premeditation of evils that Cato used so effectively. Spend time imagining how you would respond if you lost your job, your health, your relationships, your reputation, or your financial security. Not to become paranoid or pessimistic, but to build psychological resilience and clarify your priorities. What would you do if your biggest fear came true tomorrow? How would you want to respond to your worst-case scenario? Who would you choose to be if everything you're attached to was taken away? Fourth, pay attention to the small 3-second tests that happen throughout your day. The moment when you could speak up or stay silent. The choice between doing what's right or what's easy. The decision to face an uncomfortable truth or avoid it for another day. These moments are opportunities to practice being the person you want to be when it really counts. Finally, remember that the goal isn't to become someone who never feels fear, doubt, or uncertainty. The goal is to become someone who acts with integrity despite those feelings. Cato was afraid in his final hours, but his fear didn't control his choices. This is the ultimate lesson of the 3-second death test. Character isn't the absence of weakness. It's strength that persists in spite of weakness. It's not about never falling down. It's about what you do when you get back up. Your 3-second test will come. It might be tomorrow, or it might be 20 years from now. But when it arrives, you'll discover exactly who you've chosen to become through all the small choices you made when nobody was watching. The question is, what will that test reveal about you? Will it show someone who spent their life building character, integrity, and strength? Or will it reveal someone who spent their time building comfort, convenience, and excuses? The choice is yours, and you make it new every single day. Start building the character you want to have when it matters most, because when your moment comes, there won't be time to prepare. There will only be time to reveal who you've already chosen to become. That's the true power of Cato's 3-second death test. It doesn't just assess your character, it builds it. Use it wisely.